The 1950s kitchen ran on ingenuity and almost nothing else. A handful of pennies, a can from the shelf, and whatever was left from Sunday, and you had a full meal on the table that nobody in this country bothers to cook anymore. Wait until you hear what families used to do with a single can of salmon and a handful of crackers. And one dish on this list was served in hotel dining rooms and school cafeterias at the same time, built from nothing but leftover chicken and a handful of pantry staples. These were the suppers that kept families full on nothing, and they disappeared the moment frozen dinners showed up in the grocery aisle. So hit subscribe and stay with me, because here are 30 cheap meals from the 1950s no one makes anymore. Number 30. Creamed chipped beef on toast. The military called it something unprintable. Civilians just called it Tuesday. You took a jar of dried beef, shredded it, and dropped it into a thick cream sauce, just butter melted with a spoonful of flour and enough milk to loosen it. Poured the whole thing over toast and sat down. The plate was full in 5 minutes, and the cost was barely worth counting. The beef came in small glass jars and cost next to nothing, and the sauce stretched it far enough to fill a plate without complaint. Soldiers brought the recipe home after the war, and for about 10 years it showed up on kitchen tables from Pennsylvania to Oregon. By the late 1960s, it started disappearing. Dried beef got harder to find, and the name did not help. But anyone who grew up eating it remembers the taste before they remember the name. Number 29. Salmon patties. A can of pink salmon, an egg, some crushed saltine crackers, and a hot skillet with oil. You drained the can, picked out the bones if you were particular, mixed everything together, shaped it into patties, and fried them until they were brown on both sides. Families ate these once a week in some parts of the country, especially on Fridays in Catholic households where meat was off the table. The can was cheap enough to buy every week, and the patties were filling enough to pass for a real dinner. Most people under 40 have never seen one. A squeeze of lemon and a pile of peas on the side, and nobody at that table was complaining. One skillet, 5 minutes, done. Before I go on, this is for the folks who want all of these recipes gathered in one place. I put together the vintage recipe guide with more meals, like the ones you are hearing today. You can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not bring it up again. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 28. Hot dog and macaroni skillet. You boiled a box of elbow macaroni, sliced up a few hot dogs, and threw everything into a skillet with a can of tomato sauce. Some families added a handful of shredded cheese on top. Others did not bother. The whole thing took 15 minutes and cost less than most side dishes at a restaurant today. Kids loved it because it looked like real food, something with color and shape on the plate. It used up whatever was already in the pantry and did not require a trip to the store. This was a weeknight staple across the Midwest and the South, and it vanished quietly. People moved on. The recipe did not write itself down. Number 27. Fried bologna sandwiches. You took a thick slice of bologna, cut a slit in the edge so it would not curl up, and fried it in a hot skillet until the edges went crispy and brown. Then you put it on white bread with mustard, maybe a slice of American cheese if you had it. That was lunch. That was the whole evening meal on some nights too. Bologna was one of the cheapest proteins you could buy, and frying it changed the texture completely. The outside got caramelized and a little smoky, and the inside stayed soft. It was a blue-collar sandwich that tasted better than it had any right to. You could make it in 3 minutes with one pan and spend barely anything doing it. Number 26. Bread and milk supper. This was what you ate when there was nothing else in the house. You broke up a few slices of bread into a bowl, poured cold or warm milk over it, and sometimes added a spoonful of sugar. There was no cooking involved. There was no recipe to follow. It was the last line of defense between eating and not eating, and millions of Americans grew up on it during lean weeks. Some people remember it fondly, the way the bread went soft and the milk turned sweet. Others remember it as the meal that meant the money had run out. It disappeared not because people forgot how, but because they chose to leave it behind. Number 25, lima bean soup. A bag of dried lima beans, a ham bone, an onion, and a pot of water. You simmered the whole thing for hours until the beans broke down into a thick, starchy soup that stuck to your ribs and stayed there. Some cooks added a chopped potato to thicken it more. Others dropped in a bay leaf and let it ride. The ham bone gave it all the salt and smoke it needed, and the beans did the rest. This was a soup that could feed a household for 2 days on ingredients you could count on one hand. It was plain and honest and filling, and by the 1970s, it was gone from most American tables. Lima beans fell out of favor, and the soup went with them. Number 24, tomato soup over rice. You opened a can of tomato soup, heated it up with a can of water, and spooned it over a plate of white rice. Some households added a pat of butter on top. This was not something you saw in cookbooks or on restaurant menus. It was something mothers invented on nights when the cupboard was thin and the clock was ticking. The soup gave it flavor, the rice gave it volume. Together, they added up to a meal that filled you up without asking much from the grocery budget. For a lot of families in the 1950s, this was a perfectly normal weeknight supper. Nobody apologized for it, and nobody asked for seconds because the pot was already empty. Number 23, tuna noodle casserole. A can of tuna, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a bag of egg noodles, and a handful of crushed potato chips on top. You mixed the first 3 together, poured it into a baking dish, covered it with the chips, and baked it until it bubbled. This was one of the most common casseroles in mid-century America, and for good reason. It used shelf-stable ingredients that most families already had on hand. The potato chip crust gave it a crunch that made the whole thing feel deliberate instead of improvised. Church cookbooks across the country printed dozens of versions, but somewhere around the 1980s, tuna casserole became a punchline, and people stopped making it. Number 22, Welsh rarebit. The name sounds fancy. It is melted cheese on toast. You made a sauce by melting sharp cheddar with a splash of beer or milk, a pinch of dry mustard, and a dash of Worcestershire sauce. Then you poured it over thick slices of toasted bread and ate it with a fork. The name comes from old British humor, a joke about being too poor to hunt rabbit, so you ate cheese instead. American diners picked it up in the early 1900s, and it stayed on menus through the 1950s. By the 1970s, it was gone. People forgot the name, and without the name, nobody looked for the recipe. It was better than it sounds, and it deserves a second chance. Number 21, potato soup. You peeled and cubed a few potatoes, boiled them in water or milk with a chopped onion, and mashed some of them against the edge of the pot until the broth went thick. A little butter, salt, and pepper. Some cooks stirred in a spoonful of flour to give it more body. Others crumbled bacon on top if they had it. The soup was white, thick, and warm, the kind of meal that could carry a whole evening when nothing else was available. Potatoes were the cheapest vegetable in any store, and they still are. But the real version made from scratch, without a box or a packet, has mostly disappeared from American kitchens. Number 20, chicken a la king. This was one of the most popular dishes in America for about 30 years, and then it vanished almost completely. You started with leftover chicken, diced it up, and stirred it into a thick cream sauce with peas, mushrooms, and pimentos. The sauce started with a lump of butter in a hot pan, a handful of flour stirred in, and milk added slowly until it thickened into something rich and glossy. Half the recipes from this era began the same way. You served it over toast, over rice, or inside a pastry shell if you were feeling ambitious. Restaurants served it on fine china. Hotel dining rooms put it on the menu alongside steaks and chops. It was considered a refined dish, and it barely dented the grocery budget because the whole point was using up chicken that had already been roasted the night before. Every scrap had a second life. By the late 1960s, chicken a la king started showing up in frozen dinner trays and canned versions, and that was the beginning of the end. Once something moves from the hotel dining room to the freezer aisle, it loses its identity. People stopped associating it with home cooking and started associating it with convenience food. The fresh version disappeared from kitchens, and the frozen version eventually disappeared from stores. What made this dish work was not the recipe itself. It was the logic behind it. You roasted a chicken on Sunday, and by Monday you had enough leftover meat to build a completely different dinner. The cream sauce transformed yesterday's roast into something that felt new and intentional. That kind of thinking used to be automatic. Today, it would be called a life hack. Back then, it was just what you did with what you had. Number 19. Porcupine meatballs. You mixed ground beef with raw rice, an egg, and a little onion. Shaped the mixture into balls, dropped them into a pot of tomato sauce, and let the whole thing simmer for about an hour. As the meatballs cooked, the rice inside swelled up and poked through the surface, giving them a spiky look that earned the name. Kids thought they were hilarious. The rice stretched the meat further than breadcrumbs ever could, the tomato sauce made its own gravy, and everything cooked in one pot without a single side dish needed. This was a meal that entertained children and stayed inside a grocery budget at the same time. It was clever, and it worked every time. Number 18. Beans and Franks. A can of baked beans and a few sliced hot dogs heated together in a pot or baked in the oven with a little brown sugar and mustard on top. A full dinner in a lot of homes, and nobody questioned it. The beans gave you the protein and the bulk. The hot dogs gave you something to chew on. Together, they made a meal that took about 10 minutes to put together and fed everyone at the table. This showed up at church suppers, scout campouts, and kitchen tables every week across the country. It was never glamorous. It was never meant to be. And somewhere along the way, people decided it was not real food anymore. Number 17. American chop suey. This had nothing to do with Chinese food. It was elbow macaroni, ground beef, onions, and canned tomatoes, all cooked together in one pot. In New England, they called it American chop suey. In the Midwest, they called it goulash. In the South, they called it whatever they wanted. The name changed depending on where you lived, but the recipe stayed almost identical from coast to coast. You browned the meat, added everything else, and let it simmer until the pasta soaked up the sauce. One pot, one burner, one trip to the sink afterward. It fed a crowd without complaint. The name is the only thing people ever argued about. Number 16. Corned beef hash and eggs. You opened a can of corned beef hash, spread it flat in a hot skillet, and let the bottom get crispy while you cracked 2 eggs on top. Some people covered the skillet to steam the eggs. Others flipped the whole thing over like a pancake. Either way, you had a meal in under 10 minutes that stuck with you for hours. The canned hash was salty, dense, and full of potatoes, and the eggs on top gave it something soft to balance all that crunch. Diners served it as a breakfast special, but in a lot of homes it was dinner. You ate it with toast and a cup of coffee and called it a night. Number 15. Scalloped potatoes with ham. You sliced potatoes thin, layered them in a baking dish with chunks of leftover ham and a simple bechamel, butter and flour stirred together and thinned with warm milk, and baked the whole thing until the top turned golden and the potatoes were soft all the way through. This took an hour in the oven and the smell filled the entire house. It was a one-dish meal that used up Sunday's ham and stretched it into a completely different dinner by Wednesday. The sauce glued everything together and the potatoes absorbed all the salt and smoke from the meat. This was slow, patient cooking built around whatever was already sitting in the icebox. It rewarded the women who planned ahead. Number 14. Stuffed green peppers. You cut the tops off green bell peppers, scooped out the seeds, and filled them with a mixture of ground beef, cooked rice, onion, and tomato sauce. Then you packed them side by side in a casserole dish, ladled extra tomato sauce over the top, and baked them until the peppers were soft and the filling was cooked through. Ground beef was cheap, rice was cheaper. Peppers were in season for months, and when they were, you could get a bagful for next to nothing at the market. A dozen stuffed peppers could feed a big family for what a single restaurant meal costs today. What made them special was the presentation. They sat on the plate like little packages, each one self-contained, each one the same size. Children got their own pepper, adults got their own pepper. There was no fighting over portions because the portions were built right into the shape of the food itself. Stuffed peppers showed up in community cookbooks all over the country. Every church, every women's club, every PTA fundraiser cookbook had a version. Some cooks used sausage instead of beef. Some added corn or chopped celery. Some topped them with a thick layer of melted cheese. The filling changed from house to house, but the idea stayed the same. A whole meal inside a vegetable. The pepper was the bowl, the plate, and the container all at once. You did not need anything else on the table except maybe a piece of bread to soak up the sauce at the bottom of the dish. By the time fast food took over the American dinner table, stuffed peppers were already fading. Today, they are a memory for most people and a mystery for the rest. Number 13, hamburger gravy on rice. You browned a pound of ground beef, sprinkled in some flour, and poured in milk or water until it turned into a thick, peppery gravy. Then you spooned it over a mound of white rice and called it dinner. Some families called it hamburger gravy. Others called it poor man's stroganoff. The name depended on how much your mother wanted to dress it up. The taste was beefy and warm and heavy enough to keep you full until morning. This was the kind of meal that did not exist in any cookbook. It lived in the muscle memory of women who cooked the same handful of things on rotation every single week. Number 12, Spam and eggs. You sliced Spam thin, fried the slices until the edges got crispy, and served them next to scrambled or fried eggs. That was breakfast, lunch, or dinner depending on the day and the budget. Spam came home with the troops after the war and never left the American pantry. It was shelf-stable, cheap, and it fried up like a saltier, denser version of ham. The people who loved it really loved it. A properly fried slice of Spam has a caramelized crust that changes everything about the texture. Paired with eggs and a piece of toast, it was a complete meal for pocket change. Hawaii still eats it by the ton. The mainland moved on a long time ago. Number 11, codfish cakes. Salted cod was a pantry staple long before refrigeration was common in American homes, and codfish cakes were one of the simplest things you could make with it. You soaked the cod overnight to pull out the salt, shredded it, mixed it with mashed potatoes and a beaten egg, shaped the mixture into patties, and fried them in a hot skillet. The outside got golden and crisp. The inside was soft and faintly briny. New England families ate these every week, especially on Fridays. When fresh fish became easier to buy and refrigerators showed up in every kitchen, the salted cod disappeared from grocery shelves and codfish cakes went with it. Number 10, milk toast. This was the meal you got when you were sick or when there was almost nothing left in the house. You toasted a slice of bread, put it in a bowl, poured warm milk over it, and added a pinch of salt and a small pat of butter. The toast soaked up the milk and turned soft, and you ate it with a spoon like cereal. It sounds like nothing, and in a way it was nothing. But it was warm and gentle and easy to swallow when your stomach was not cooperating. Mothers made it without being told. It was comfort food in its most stripped-down form, and it has vanished completely from modern kitchens. Nobody under 50 knows what it is. Number 9, cheese dreams. This was a 1950s after-school staple that most people have completely forgotten. You put a slice of American cheese on a piece of bread, laid a strip or two of bacon across the top, and broiled it in the oven until the cheese melted and the bacon crisped up. Some versions added a slice of tomato underneath the cheese for color. The name showed up in women's magazines and school lunch menus for years, and kids loved it because it was gooey, crispy, and simple enough for an older child to make without help. It was a grilled cheese with ambition. Today, the name means nothing to most people, but the idea behind it still works perfectly. Number 8, navy bean soup. A pound of dried navy beans, a ham bone, water, and thyme. You soaked the beans overnight, put them in a pot with the bone and enough water to cover everything by a couple of inches, and let the whole thing cook low and slow for most of the day. The beans broke down into a thick, creamy soup that did not need anything else. The ham bone gave it salt, smoke, and body. By the time it was done, you had enough food for 3 or 4 meals. The United States Senate dining room has served navy bean soup every single day for over 100 years. But in American homes, this soup has all but disappeared. The beans are still cheap. The patience is what people ran out of. Number 7, Johnny Mazzetti. Ground beef, onions, mushrooms, elbow macaroni, tomato sauce, and shredded cheese, all baked together in one dish. This casserole was born in Ohio and spread through church cookbooks and women's club recipe exchanges across the Midwest in the 1940s and 1950s. It was easy, it was cheap, and it fed a crowd without any fuss at all. The name is what made it memorable. Johnny Mazzetti. It sounded like a person who would show up at your door with a covered dish and a story to tell. The casserole has mostly been absorbed into the broader category of baked pasta, and the name has faded with it. Nobody calls it that anymore. Number 6. Chicken and dumplings. You simmered a whole chicken in a pot of water with carrots, celery, and onion until the meat fell off the bone. Then you pulled the chicken out, shredded the meat, returned it to the broth, and dropped in spoonfuls of dumpling dough made from flour, baking powder, milk, and a pinch of salt. The dumplings puffed up and floated on top of the broth, soaking up all that chicken flavor from underneath. This took half a day to make, and the kitchen smelled like someone's grandmother lived there. Chicken and dumplings still exists in some parts of the South, but the from-scratch version, the one made with a whole bird and hand-mixed dumplings, is nearly extinct. The canned version is not the same thing. Number 5. Liver and onions with gravy. Beef liver, sliced thin, dredged in flour, and fried in a hot skillet with a pile of sliced onions. The onions went in first and cooked low until they turned soft and sweet. Then the liver went in and cooked fast, just a couple of minutes per side. You made a quick gravy in the same pan with the drippings and a splash of water and served the whole thing over mashed potatoes. Liver was one of the cheapest cuts at the butcher counter, and the onions covered up whatever flavor people claimed they did not like. The generation that grew up on it either loved it or swore they would never eat it again. Either way, it is gone from most dinner tables in this country. Number 4. Sloppy Joes. Ground beef, onion, ketchup, a little mustard, a little Worcestershire sauce, all simmered in a skillet until it turned into a thick, sweet, tangy mess. You spooned it onto a hamburger bun and ate it with your hands, or tried to. The whole point of a sloppy Joe was that it fell apart. The bun got soggy. The filling slid out the sides. You ate it over the plate and wiped your hands on a napkin and went back for seconds. Schools served them. Diners served them. Mothers made them on nights when the schedule was tight and the budget was tighter. The homemade version has mostly been replaced by something out of a can, and the taste is worlds apart. Number 3. Meatloaf. Ground beef, breadcrumbs, an egg, and a little onion, mixed together with your hands and shaped into a loaf in a baking pan. The top got a coat of ketchup or canned tomato sauce, and the whole thing went into the oven for about an hour. The recipe changed from house to house, but the idea was always the same. You took the cheapest ground meat you could find and turned it into something that looked and felt like a real entree. It was served with mashed potatoes and green beans, always, and the leftovers made sandwiches the next day that were almost better than the original. Meatloaf has not disappeared completely, but the 1950s version, the one made with nothing but beef and breadcrumbs and a smear of ketchup, is a different animal from what people make today. Number 2. Sunday pot roast. A cheap cut of beef, usually chuck, browned on all sides in a heavy pot with a little oil. Then you added water or broth, dropped in carrots, potatoes, and onions, covered the pot, and let the whole thing cook in a low oven for 3 or 4 hours. By the time it was done, the meat was so tender you could pull it apart with a fork, and the vegetables had soaked up all the flavor from the beef. This was the centerpiece of Sunday dinner in millions of American homes. The roast went in before church and came out after. The leftovers lasted until Wednesday. The cheapest cuts made the best roasts because the long, slow cooking broke down all the tough fibers into something rich and impossibly soft. Time did the work that money could not. Number 1. Chicken soup from scratch. Not from a can, not from a carton. From a whole chicken simmered in a pot of water with celery, carrots, onion, and salt until the bones gave up everything they had. You pulled the bird out, stripped the meat, dropped it back in with egg noodles or rice, and let it cook until the noodles were soft and the broth was golden. This is the oldest cheap meal in the world, and it is the one that matters most. It was what your mother made when you were sick. It was what your grandmother made when the first cold front came through in October. It was the first meal a young wife learned to cook and the last meal an old woman remembered how to make. Chicken soup is not just food, it is proof that someone in the kitchen still cares enough to try. Mock banana pudding was the sort of dish that showed just how inventive Depression-era cooks could be when real ingredients were simply out of reach. Bananas, once imported luxuries, quickly became too expensive for families to buy. To make up for it, people leaned on banana extract, which could be purchased cheaply and used sparingly to add flavor, layered with homemade custard, when eggs and milk could be spared, and stacked between vanilla wafers or leftover bits of stale cake. The pudding felt surprisingly close to the original. Families would chill it in an icebox if they had one, though often it was served warm right from the stove. For children, it was a rare treat that offered the illusion of a fruit dessert, even if no fresh fruit was present. In many homes, mock banana pudding became a stand-in for celebration desserts, stretching scarce supplies into something families could still enjoy together, and for many, it carried the sweetness of hope itself. Mustard green spaghetti was a southern experiment that worked better than it had any right to. You'd boil spaghetti noodles, toss them in a pan with wilted mustard greens, and hit it with a dash of hot sauce for punch. The greens were bitter, the pasta plain, but somehow it came together into something hearty and bold. It was the perfect marriage of Italian thrift and southern grit. Some folks added a spoonful of margarine to mellow the greens. Others went heavy on the spice to make it sing. It was an accidental recipe that spread through kitchens where fresh produce was rare and creativity was required. Mustard green spaghetti might sound strange to anyone who didn't live through lean years, but for those who did, it was genius. It filled your stomach and left you proud you'd made something out of almost nothing. It was humble food with heart, and that made it better than any restaurant plate. Grilled cheese and tomato soup was the closest thing to comfort food that poverty could buy. 2 slices of bread, a single slice of cheese. Into the pan it went, sizzling in butter or margarine until golden brown. You flipped it once, maybe twice, careful not to burn it. The cheese melted just enough to glue it all together. You knew this was poor man's food, but it never tasted that way. It tasted like someone tried. It tasted like effort, not leftovers. Then came the tomato soup, hot, red, and straight from the can. You poured it into a chipped bowl and dipped the sandwich in until it softened at the edges. That was the bite. The one that made it feel like someone cared. This was a sick day meal, a snow day meal, a we still have cheese meal, and it felt like a hug every time. Even now, the smell alone can take you back. Barley and mushroom gravy bowl brought hearty texture and deep flavor to the dinner table using ingredients that cost only pennies per serving. Pearl barley was simmered until tender and spooned into bowls, then generously topped with a thick mushroom gravy made from sautéed onions, sliced mushrooms, and a splash of milk or broth. The barley's nutty chewiness paired perfectly with the savory gravy, creating a meal that was both comforting and surprisingly filling. This dish proved that meat was not necessary to achieve a rich, satisfying flavor, making it popular among families seeking economical vegetarian options. Barley stored well and cooked in bulk, so a single bag could supply multiple meals over the week. The recipe also welcomed leftovers, allowing home cooks to add bits of vegetables or herbs on hand without increasing the cost. Served with a simple green salad, barley and mushroom gravy bowl became a quiet star of thrifty 1960s kitchens, showcasing how whole grains and careful seasoning could create a dinner that felt indulgent despite its humble origins. Of cuts without the price, an idea perfectly suited to the frugal 1960s kitchen. Ground pork was blended with breadcrumbs, minced onion, and a touch of milk before being seasoned with a bit of sage and pepper to mimic the gentle taste of veal. The mixture was shaped into a loaf and baked until the top formed a golden crust and the inside stayed moist and tender. A light tomato glaze or brown gravy completed the illusion, giving families a hearty centerpiece that felt far fancier than its ingredients suggested. This recipe became a favorite in community cookbooks and church fundraisers because it fed a crowd with ingredients already on hand. Leftovers made excellent sandwiches the next day, stretching the value even further. By transforming simple pork and pantry staples into something that seemed luxurious, mock veal loaf embodied the clever resourcefulness that defined many mid-century American dinners, proving that satisfying flavor did not require an expensive shopping list or complicated preparation. Television dinners were what happened when the future met the food budget. Frozen meals in foil trays, stacked in the freezer like little time capsules of convenience. Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes, peas or corn, a square of apple cobbler that always burned your tongue. You pulled it from the box, popped it in the oven, and waited. No prep, no planning. Just peel back the foil and pretend you were eating like everyone else. These dinners were born in the 1950s, but they stuck around because they made sense. Especially when you worked late or your parents were too tired to cook, or there just was not enough of anything to make a real meal. The food never looked like the picture. But it was hot. It had variety. It felt like a feast when you only expected a sandwich. You ate it in front of the television, a tray on your lap, the glow of the screen making it all feel a little more okay. These dinners were never about flavor. They were about escape. Cheesewater soup might sound pitiful at first, but to families scraping by, it was survival disguised as comfort. When the pantry was empty, the milk long gone, and payday still days away, a spoonful of powdered cheese stirred into boiling water was enough to lift spirits. The steam carried the smell of warmth, even if the meal itself was little more than wishful thinking. Parents whisked it fast so the powder would melt smooth, creating the illusion of a creamy broth. A few shakes of pepper or a torn piece of stale bread on the side turned it into a full supper. Kids didn't question it. They called it cheese soup and slurped it proudly. It was salty, thin, and simple, but it filled the belly and soothed the mind. For adults, it was less about flavor and more about dignity, proof that even when the cupboards were bare, there was still something to feed the family. Cheesewater soup wasn't a dish people bragged about making, but everyone who lived through hard times remembered it. It was the taste of perseverance poured into a chipped bowl, reminding everyone that even the humblest meal could feel like home. Rutabaga hash was a clever dish that made the most of rutabagas, which were cheaper and more plentiful than potatoes during the Depression. Families would chop the firm root into small cubes, frying it with onions and whatever fat they could find. The rutabaga softened and browned, giving a texture and taste that mimicked potatoes closely enough to satisfy hungry families. Sometimes scraps of bacon or ham were added for flavor, but more often it was just the vegetables alone. The hash was hearty, filling, and adaptable, often appearing at both breakfast and dinner tables. Since rutabagas grew well in harsh conditions, they were dependable crops when potatoes ran short. Many children grew up not realizing their parents had been serving them substitutes, because the crispy fried cubes tasted so much like the real thing. Rutabaga hash showed how families made necessity feel normal, turning cheap vegetables into meals that could carry them through some of the hardest years in memory. Hot dog fried rice was the 1980s answer to fast food when nobody could afford the drive-thru. You'd grab the leftover rice from the night before, toss it into a skillet, and chop up a few hot dogs to throw in. The soy sauce packets saved from cheap takeout finally earned their keep, sizzling as they hit the pan. The smell filled every corner of the kitchen, salty and smoky with a little sweetness from the rice. If you had an egg, you'd crack it right in and stir fast, watching it turn the whole thing golden. If you didn't, no one complained. The hot dogs carried enough flavor to make it feel like a real meal. It looked humble, but it tasted like triumph. Families made it at the end of the week when groceries ran low, and somehow it always hit the spot. It stretched scraps into dinner, turned leftovers into pride, and reminded everyone that creativity was just as filling as wealth. Kids didn't know it was poverty food. To them, it was comfort on a plate. Hot dog fried rice was the flavor of resilience, sizzling proof that even struggle could taste good if you knew how to fry it right. Vegetable curry stew introduced a mild touch of international flavor to American kitchens while staying firmly in the realm of affordable comfort food. Potatoes, carrots, Onions and canned chickpeas simmered slowly with a gentle dusting of curry powder, filling the house with a warm, spiced aroma that felt both new and familiar. The recipe was flexible enough to accept any vegetables on hand, making it ideal for gardeners or thrifty shoppers. During the 1960s, when interest in global flavors was growing, this stew offered a budget-friendly way to explore something different without leaving the home kitchen. Served with plain rice or a slice of crusty bread, it delivered a complete protein and plenty of satisfying texture. Families discovered that the spices brightened otherwise simple ingredients, proving that excitement at the dinner table did not require expensive meats or specialty imports. Vegetable curry stew stands as a delicious example of how mid-century cooks embraced fresh ideas while still practicing the frugality and adaptability that defined their daily meals. Cabbage soup was the dinner of last resort, but it never let you down. You took a head of cabbage, chopped it rough, and threw it into boiling water or broth. Add onions, add carrots, add whatever vegetables you could scrounge from the crisper. The broth was thin, sometimes flavored with a bouillon cube, sometimes just salt and pepper. But it filled the house with steam and the smell of something cooking, something real. You served it in big bowls, sometimes with bread, sometimes without. It was watery, it was plain, but it was warm, and it kept your belly full. Some families made it with a little ground meat or sausage if they had it. Most just leaned on the cabbage and hoped it stretched far enough. It was not the kind of soup you bragged about. But it was the kind you remembered, because it showed up when there was almost nothing left. Oatmeal. Gruel was one of the humblest Depression foods, often reserved for children, the elderly, or the sick. Rolled oats were boiled in water until thin and soupy, sometimes flavored with milk if it could be spared, or a sprinkle of sugar when available. It lacked richness, but it was nourishing and easy to digest, which made it practical when stronger meals were impossible. For many families, oatmeal gruel was served as both breakfast and dinner, stretching a handful of oats across several bowls. Though plain, it provided much-needed energy and warmth in a time when calories were hard to come by. Parents ate less of it themselves, saving portions for their children. While it might not have been anyone's favorite meal, it carried the comfort of something warm in otherwise hungry days. For countless households, oatmeal gruel was both a symbol of hardship and proof of how people endured with the simplest foods. Canned tomato sandwiches were the taste of summer when nothing else was left in the fridge. You'd pop open a can of whole or sliced tomatoes, drain them just enough to stop the bread from falling apart, then slather both slices with mayonnaise. A sprinkle of salt and pepper went on top, maybe a little sugar if you came from the South, and that was lunch done. It was cold, slippery, messy, and perfect all at once. The juice soaked into the bread, softening it until every bite felt like a mix of tang and cream. It wasn't a fancy sandwich, but it was the one that kept bellies full on long, hot afternoons when money ran out before the month did. Some people added lettuce if they had it. Most didn't bother. It was simple, nostalgic, and surprisingly satisfying. The flavor was sharp, honest, and comforting in a way that no processed meal could be. It didn't matter that it came from a can, it still tasted like home. Every bite told a story of resourcefulness and grace under pressure. For families in the 1980s, canned tomato sandwiches were proof that even the simplest things could feel like love. Pancakes for dinner was the rebellion no one talked about, but everyone loved. You mixed flour, milk, and eggs in a bowl, poured it onto a hot griddle, and watched the bubbles rise like tiny promises. Stack after stack, golden and imperfect, sometimes burnt at the edges. It felt like cheating, but no one called it out. In a house full of stress and unpaid bills, it was the rare moment that felt light. Pancakes reminded us we could bend the rules without breaking ourselves. You poured syrup until it pooled at the base, or you used jam, honey, or even just sugar and butter. Whatever you had, dinner did not have to be savory. It did not have to follow the rules. Pancakes were a reminder that even when money was tight, you could still enjoy something. You could still treat yourself. Kids loved it. Adults sighed with relief. No meat, no sides, just breakfast masquerading as dinner. And maybe that is what made it so special. It felt like breaking the rules in the best possible way. bologna, and apple skillet combined two humble ingredients in a sweet and savory partnership that captured the playful side of 1960s home cooking. Slices of bologna were quickly browned in a cast-iron skillet, then tossed with diced apples and a small knob of butter until the fruit softened and released its natural juices. The salty meat and gently sweet apples created a flavor that felt surprisingly rich despite the low cost. This dish made excellent use of ingredients that were almost always on hand: inexpensive deli meat and seasonal fruit. Families appreciated its speed on busy weeknights, while children were drawn to the fun contrast of tastes and textures. Served over toast or alongside mashed potatoes, it became a complete meal that proved resourceful cooks could create memorable flavors from the simplest pantry staples. Decades later, it remains a reminder of how imaginative combinations could turn everyday items into an unexpected treat without straining a modest household budget or requiring elaborate preparation. Ramen noodles were the dinner of desperation that somehow became a ritual. A block of dried noodles, a packet of salt and spice, and 3 minutes in boiling water. That was it. That was the whole recipe. And yet, it kept showing up in pantries, college dorms, first apartments, and homes where money ran out before the month did. You could dress it up, sure, but no one was fooled. It was hunger food, dressed in hot broth and convenience. And somehow that truth only made it more familiar. You slurped it straight from the bowl, steam burning your face, the broth clinging to your lips. Sometimes you added an egg, sometimes hot sauce, but most times you just made do. The noodles were limp, the broth was salty enough to sting, but it was food, and food meant one more night survived. You did not eat it because you wanted to. You ate it because it was all you could afford, and you learned to love it anyway. Pancake batter corn dogs were the carnival you made when you couldn't afford the fare. You'd mix up a bowl of pancake batter, slice hot dogs into chunks, and spear them with whatever you could find: forks, chopsticks, or even straws. Then came the best part: dipping each one into the batter and dropping it into hot oil until the outside puffed up and turned golden. The smell alone could make the whole block jealous. Sweet, crispy, and greasy in all the right ways, they were chaos turned delicious. Families made them on Friday nights when they wanted to give the kids something fun without spending anything extra. Sometimes they dipped them in syrup, sometimes in ketchup, sometimes both. There were no rules. You could fry 10 of them for the cost of one real corn dog, and everyone got seconds. They were crunchy on the edges, soft in the middle, and gone in minutes. Pancake batter corn dogs were a reminder that joy didn't need money. It just needed a little imagination and a lot of hot oil. In a world that felt hard, these golden bites brought a little laughter back to the table. Cabbage coleslaw proved that absolutely nothing went to waste in the Depression era. While most people today throw away the tough core of a cabbage, thrifty families of the 1930s shaved it finely to make a crunchy salad. With vinegar, a little sugar, and maybe a pinch of salt, it transformed into something tangy and surprisingly refreshing. Carrots or onions, if available, might be added for color and flavor, but often it was just the cabbage core itself. It became a side dish for meals that otherwise would have been too plain or heavy, adding brightness without any real cost. This slaw was a simple reminder that waste was not an option, and even what many considered garbage could become a dish worth serving. Families learned to enjoy the sharp taste and crunchy bite, and for some, it even became a regular part of the dinner table. Oatmeal patties came from mornings when waste was unthinkable, and every leftover had a second act. Cold oatmeal from breakfast would be mixed with an egg, maybe some flour, and fried up like pancakes in a sizzling pan. They crisped on the outside and stayed soft in the middle, smelling faintly of cinnamon or whatever sugar you'd stirred in before. It was the kind of breakfast that made sense in tight times. You already had it, so why not make it better? You could spread a little syrup on top or just eat it plain, standing at the stove with the spatula still in your hand. Kids didn't complain. They thought it was new, not recycled. Families who grew up poor never forgot oatmeal patties because they represented something special, making the most of what was left. Even when money got better, you'd find people still frying them up out of habit. The golden edges, the smell of butter, the sizzle, It was breakfast reborn. Shepherd's pie was the meal of second chances. You took yesterday's meat, mixed it with whatever vegetables you had, canned peas, frozen corn, even just onions, and laid it down like the foundation of something better. Then you spread mashed potatoes on top like frosting, soft and thick and hopeful. Into the oven it went, and out came something that looked and smelled like you tried. It was the art of disguise. Leftovers turned into something new. Scraps turned into comfort. You scooped it out with a spoon, the layers blending together in a hot, savory mess that never looked perfect, but always felt right. It made the table feel full, even when the fridge was empty. And sometimes that illusion was all you needed to keep going. Shepherd's pie reminded you that with enough heat and time, even the broken pieces could come together. Cornflake-crusted fish squares were a playful answer to the challenge of making inexpensive whitefish appealing to the whole family. Thin fillets of cod or haddock were cut into squares, dipped in milk and egg, and coated with crushed cornflakes left over from breakfast. Baking or frying turned the cereal coating into a crisp, golden crust that sealed in moisture and added a gentle sweetness. This recipe allowed households to use affordable frozen fish while giving it a texture reminiscent of more expensive fried seafood. Children found the crunchy coating irresistible, and parents enjoyed how quickly the dish came together on busy weeknights. The cornflakes acted as an economical substitute for breadcrumbs and made use of pantry items that might otherwise go stale. Served with a squeeze of lemon or a side of tartar sauce, these fish squares brought a fun and frugal twist to the dinner table, showing the inventive spirit of 1960s cooking where nothing in the kitchen ever went to waste. Rutabaga and carrot mash brought together two hearty root vegetables that thrived in cold climates and offered dependable nourishment long after harvest. Peeled rutabagas and carrots were boiled until tender, then whipped with butter and a sprinkle of black pepper into a smooth, golden mash. The natural sweetness of the carrots balanced the earthy flavor of the rutabaga, creating a dish that felt both rustic and refined. Because these vegetables stored well in cellars for months, families could rely on them for inexpensive winter meals when fresh produce was scarce. The bright color and gentle taste appealed to children, while adults appreciated the hearty texture and vitamins packed into every spoonful. Served alongside roasted chicken when budgets allowed or enjoyed on its own with a slice of bread, rutabaga and carrot mash exemplified the 1960s emphasis on making the most of seasonal vegetables. It remains a comforting side or main dish that highlights how frugal ingredients can combine to create something far greater than the sum of their humble parts. Canned Vienna sausages were the snack that somehow became dinner more often than anyone wanted to admit. You pulled back the metal lid, revealing 6 or 7 tiny pink sausages floating in mystery liquid. They smelled like salt and metal and something vaguely meaty. You ate them cold, straight from the can, or warmed them in a pot if you had time. Sometimes you served them with crackers, sometimes just with your fingers. No one dreamed of Vienna sausages, but we learned to respect them. They were there when fresh food was not. They tasted like hard times, but also like resilience. They were soft, almost mushy, but full of protein and easy to store. In homes where refrigeration was unreliable and money was always short, these cans were gold. Not because they tasted good, but because they lasted. They were cheap, reliable, always there when you needed something, anything to put on a plate. You never bragged about eating Vienna sausages, but you remembered them, because they saw you through more hard days than you can count. Biscuit dough pizza boats turned canned biscuits into dinner for a crowd. You'd flatten each one into a little bowl, spoon on tomato sauce from a jar, sprinkle shredded cheese, and maybe add a slice of pepperoni if you were feeling fancy. Pop them in the oven and watch as they puffed and browned, smelling like pizza night on a dime. Kids loved them because they were small enough to hold, and parents loved them because they cost next to nothing. They looked cute, tasted amazing, and disappeared before they even cooled. It was the kind of meal you could make out of leftovers and pantry scraps without needing a recipe card. The 1980s were full of little tricks like this, turning store-brand dough and canned goods into a moment of joy. Biscuit dough pizza boats weren't just food, They were a celebration of what imagination could do on a shoestring budget. Mock fish cakes were a thrifty invention for families who longed for seafood but could not afford it during the Depression. Instead of fish, mashed beans or leftover potatoes were seasoned with onions and herbs, then shaped into patties and fried. When browned in a pan, they resembled fish cakes in both texture and appearance, providing the illusion of a more expensive meal. Families often relied on beans because they were cheap, nutritious, and available through relief programs, making them the perfect base for this dish. Some households even added breadcrumbs or stale crackers to stretch the mixture further. While it might not have carried the same flavor as real fish, it was filling and hearty, which mattered most in those years. For many children, mock fish cakes became a familiar supper, remembered later with a mix of humor and nostalgia. They embodied the era's spirit of improvisation, turning simple, humble ingredients into something that felt like a substitute for luxury. Tomato custard casserole turned two everyday items, canned tomatoes and eggs, into a richly flavored dinner that captured the resourcefulness of the 1960s. The eggs were whisked with milk and a pinch of sugar before being poured over chopped tomatoes and breadcrumbs, then baked until the custard set and the top turned slightly caramelized. This casserole provided protein, vitamins, and comfort all in one dish without requiring expensive meats or elaborate preparation. Many families served it with buttered toast or a simple green salad, letting the natural acidity of the tomatoes balance the creamy custard. The recipe became a reliable weeknight option because it used inexpensive pantry staples that were always on hand. Its smooth texture and gentle sweetness made it appealing to children, while adults appreciated the subtle complexity that developed as the tomatoes baked. This unassuming casserole is a testament to how mid-century cooks could transform basic ingredients into something hearty, nourishing, and surprisingly elegant with little more than patience and a hot oven. Meatloaf was a handshake between hard times and good intentions. It was not steak, it was not even roast. It was ground beef stretched with breadcrumbs, onions, and eggs, molded into a loaf like it wanted to be something more. You baked it in a pan until the edges browned, and if you had ketchup, you glazed the top until it caramelized into a sweet, sticky crust. Meatloaf was a family meal, a leftover meal, a please God let this last 3 days kind of meal. It sat in the center of the table like it was proud to be made out of scraps. And maybe it was. It held together, even when everything else felt like it was falling apart. Slice by slice, you ate it with mashed potatoes or just plain white bread, soaking up every bit of flavor. It was dense, it was heavy, and it was honest. Because meatloaf never pretended to be more than what it was, a way to make something out of not enough. Ritz Cracker Tuna Melt Bake was the definition of 1980s ingenuity, a dinner built from scraps that somehow felt like a feast. You'd mix canned tuna with a spoonful of mayonnaise, maybe stretch it with a little celery or onion if you had it, and spread it into a battered casserole dish. Then came the magic, a blanket of crushed Ritz crackers sprinkled over the top, glistening with butter, and a few slices of processed cheese layered for good measure. When it baked, the edges browned, the middle bubbled, and the smell filled the whole apartment like hope. It looked like luxury, but it was born from frugality. You could feed a whole family on 1 can of tuna and half a box of crackers and still have leftovers for the next day. Kids fought over the crispy top layer while parents smiled in relief. It wasn't glamorous, but it was dependable, comforting, and rich in all the right ways. This dish didn't just fill plates, it filled the silence that hunger left behind. Ritz Cracker Tuna Melt Bake turned a handful of cheap ingredients into something that tasted like victory after another long, hard day. Cucumber vinegar salad was a refreshing Depression-era side dish that added brightness to otherwise plain meals. Cucumbers were easy to grow in home gardens, and when combined with vinegar, water, and a pinch of sugar or salt, they became a simple but flavorful salad. Thinly sliced and chilled if possible, the cucumbers soaked up the tangy brine and provided crunch. For families living on beans, bread, and potatoes, this salad was a welcome change in texture and taste. It required almost no cooking, which was another benefit when fuel and time were scarce. Often served in large bowls at supper, it gave the sense of a fresh vegetable dish without requiring expensive ingredients. Sometimes onions or dill were added, but the core recipe was basic and thrifty. For many households, cucumber vinegar salad was a reminder that gardening and resourcefulness could provide something close to luxury in the hardest times. Canned ravioli was the Italian dinner that came in a can and never asked for praise. You popped open the metal lid, poured the heavy red sauce into a pot or a bowl, and microwaved it until it bubbled around the edges. The smell was artificial, the sauce too sweet, and the ravioli too soft, but none of that mattered, because it was food. And sometimes, that was the only requirement. Chef Boyardee was not a chef in your kitchen, he was a lifeline, a shortcut to something that felt like a meal, even if it came from a shelf instead of a stove. You ate it straight from the bowl, sometimes with a slice of bread to soak up the sauce. Other times, just a fork and a quick prayer that no one noticed how many nights in a row you were eating the same thing. The meat inside the pasta was more memory than substance, a whisper of protein in a sea of tomato. But it was hot, and it was filling, and it kept the stomach quiet when the cupboards were mostly bare. You were not proud of it, but you were grateful, because for $1 or less, it gave you something to hold on to. Eggplant Parmesan casserole gave budget-minded families a taste of Italian-inspired comfort without the cost of imported ingredients. Slices of eggplant were lightly breaded, quickly browned in a skillet, and layered with canned tomato sauce, dried oregano, and a modest sprinkle of grated cheese. Baked until the sauce bubbled and the cheese melted, the dish emerged fragrant and hearty, ready to feed a hungry household. Because eggplant was plentiful in late summer and canned tomatoes were available year-round, the recipe fit perfectly into a thrifty meal plan. Many 1960s home cooks discovered it through community cookbooks that encouraged vegetable-centered dinners when meat prices rose. Served with a side of spaghetti or crusty bread, it felt festive enough for company while staying within a modest budget. The mild flavor of the eggplant absorbed the savory sauce beautifully, making each bite satisfying without the need for heavy amounts of cheese or meat. Eggplant Parmesan casserole quickly became a reliable favorite for families eager to stretch their food dollars while still offering something warm and flavorful. Carrot marmalade was a sweet spread that helped families feel like they had something luxurious for breakfast, even in the toughest years of the Depression. Sugar was precious, but when it could be managed, grated carrots simmered down with citrus peel made a bright orange jam that tasted far richer than its ingredients suggested. Citrus itself was not always available, so many recipes leaned heavily on the carrots, using peel or extract when possible. The finished marmalade was thick, fragrant, and easily spread across homemade bread or crackers, turning simple staples into something that felt festive. Children loved its sweetness, and parents appreciated how it stretched a handful of carrots into enough jam to last for several mornings. Many community cookbooks published carrot marmalade recipes, encouraging families to rely on what they could grow in gardens. It was a dish that turned scarcity into creativity, and for many households it became a small comfort that brightened otherwise plain and repetitive meals. Chili and crackers were the meal you made when you needed fire in your belly and not much else. Ground beef, a can of beans, tomato sauce, and every spice you could find in the back of the cabinet. You let it simmer until it thickened, bubbling and bold, the kind of dish that fogged up the windows and warmed up the room. You served it with saltine crackers, always saltines, stacked on the side or crumbled right in. Sometimes there was shredded cheese, sometimes a dollop of sour cream. But usually, it was just the basics, and that was fine, because chili did not need help. It had enough heat, enough bite, enough heart. You ate it with a spoon too big for the bowl and left the table feeling like you had won something. Maybe you had. Sweet and sour cabbage bake turned a single, inexpensive vegetable into a lively main dish that brightened even the plainest table. Shredded cabbage was braised slowly with a mixture of vinegar, sugar, and a splash of tomato juice until the leaves softened and soaked up the tangy glaze. A small spoon of butter added just enough richness while keeping the budget firmly in check. The gentle balance of sweet and sour flavors made this casserole appealing to children and adults alike, offering a welcome contrast to heavier meat-based meals. Home cooks valued how it could be made ahead and reheated without losing its texture, making it perfect for church suppers or busy weeknights. Many families served it with thick slices of bread to soak up the flavorful juices, creating a meal that was both frugal and satisfying. This dish demonstrated how careful seasoning and slow cooking could elevate humble cabbage into something memorable, reflecting the creativity of 1960s kitchens where every ingredient was stretched and celebrated for its potential. 30 meals. All of them built from a handful of ingredients and the kind of patience that most kitchens have forgotten. The women who made them did not call themselves chefs. They called themselves mothers, and they solved the same problem every night with whatever was on that shelf. If one of these meals landed in your memory while you were listening, make it this week. Pick one. Salmon patties, stuffed peppers, chicken and dumplings, it does not matter which. Just stand at the stove and make it the way it was made before. And if you know someone who used to cook this way, share this video with them. Hit subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.